I was standing in my driveway in Henderson, Nevada, filling my propane tank from the massive 100-pound cylinder I kept beside my garage when I heard the clicking of high heels on asphalt approaching at what could only be described as an aggressive pace. "Excuse me, that's HOA property," a shrill voice announced behind me. I turned around to find a woman in her mid-40s with an asymmetrical blonde bob that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," staring at my propane tank like I'd just stolen the crown jewels. She wore a white blazer despite the 90-degree heat and clutched a leather-bound planner to her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, genuinely confused as I turned off the valve. "That propane tank," she said, pointing a manicured finger at my property. "It belongs to the Sunset Ridge HOA. I'm Brenda Patterson, HOA president, and I need you to hand that over immediately." I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. "This is my propane tank. I bought it 3 months ago from Home Depot. I have the receipt inside." Brenda's face flushed red, and she took a step closer to me, invading my personal space in a way that made me instinctively take a step back. "I don't care what receipt you think you have. The HOA board met last week, and we determined that all propane tanks over 50 pounds in the neighborhood are communal property for HOA events. You need to surrender it now." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation was too much. "Brenda, that's not how property ownership works. I bought this with my own money. It sits on my property. It's mine." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that any equipment that could benefit the community falls under shared resources." "Show me where it says that," I challenged, crossing my arms over my chest. She opened her planner and flipped through several pages with theatrical flourish before jabbing her finger at a paragraph. "Right here. Section 12, subsection D. All outdoor equipment exceeding standard residential use may be designated for community benefit at the board's discretion." I leaned in to read the actual text. "That section is about playground equipment and pool supplies. It has nothing to do with personal grilling equipment." "Propane tanks aren't specifically excluded," Brenda countered, her voice rising an octave. "They're not specifically included either, and this is for my smoker and grill. It's standard residential use." Brenda snapped her planner shut so hard I heard the crack of leather. "The HOA is having a community barbecue next month. We need that propane tank. I'm not asking any more. I'm telling you. Hand it over or there will be consequences." I felt my jaw tighten. I'd moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago, and I'd already had 3 run-ins with Brenda about ridiculous things. First, it was the color of my mailbox, which was apparently 2 shades too dark according to her interpretation of the guidelines. Then it was my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, even though I'd measured it myself and knew it was within compliance. Now this. "If the HOA needs propane for an event, buy your own," I said flatly. The change in Brenda's expression was immediate and terrifying. Her face went from red to nearly purple, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me. Buy your own propane tank. They sell them at literally any hardware store." "How dare you speak to me that way?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I run this neighborhood. I decide who gets to live here peacefully and who gets buried in violation notices until they're forced to sell." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my voice calm despite the anger building in my chest. "I'm promising you," Brenda said, leaning in close enough that I could smell her overwhelming perfume. "If you don't give me that propane tank by the end of the day, I will make your life a living hell. I will fine you for every single tiny infraction I can find. I will make sure your property value tanks. I will rally the entire neighborhood against you." "Get off my property," I said quietly. "This conversation isn't over," Brenda snapped, spinning on her heel and marching back down my driveway. I watched her go, my heart pounding with frustration and disbelief. I'd dealt with difficult people before. My name is Ethan Dalton, and I'm a software engineer who works from home. I'd spent years in corporate environments navigating office politics and unreasonable demands, but this was different. This was my home, the place where I was supposed to feel safe and relaxed. I went inside and immediately called my friend Marcus, who'd lived in HOA communities his whole life. He answered on the second ring. "You're not going to believe what just happened," I said, and launched into the whole story. Marcus let out a low whistle when I finished. "Man, that's insane even by HOA standards. She can't just claim your property." That's what I thought, but she seemed pretty convinced she had the authority. "Look, here's what you need to do. Document everything. Write down exactly what she said when she said it, all of it. Take pictures of your propane tank with timestamps. Find that receipt. And then send a certified letter to the HOA board stating that your personal property is not available for community use and that any further harassment will be reported." "You think she'll actually back off?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, no. People like that don't back off. They escalate. But you need to start building your paper trail now because this is probably going to get worse before it gets better." He was right. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. According to Brenda's meticulous handwriting, my garbage cans were visible from the street, which was a violation of Section 8 of the HOA bylaws. I walked around to look at my garbage cans, which were tucked beside my garage in the exact same spot where every other house on the block kept theirs. I took pictures and sent a response email to the HOA board, pointing out that my garbage can placement was identical to at least 15 other houses in the neighborhood and requesting that the violation be dismissed. 2 days later, I got another notice. This time, my lawn was allegedly half an inch too tall. I'd mowed it the day before. Then came a notice about my doormat being the wrong color. Then one about a package left on my porch for 2 hours being unsightly. Then one claiming that my car was parked 3 inches over my driveway boundary into the common area, which was physically impossible given the way my driveway was laid out. Every single notice came with a $50 fine attached. I sent detailed rebuttals for each one, including photographs, measurements, and references to the actual bylaw language. I heard nothing back, but the notices kept coming. After 2 weeks of this, I'd accumulated 14 violation notices totaling $700 in fines. I hadn't paid a single one because they were all completely baseless, but the stress was starting to get to me. I found myself checking my front door anxiously every morning, wondering what nonsense Brenda would come up with next. Then things escalated further. I came home from a grocery run to find Brenda in my backyard, not near my backyard, in my backyard. She was taking pictures of my patio furniture with her phone. "What are you doing?" I called out, jogging around the side of the house. Brenda didn't even look startled. "Documenting violations." "Your patio furniture is not on the approved list. Get out of my yard, now." "This is HOA business," she said dismissively, taking another picture. "This is trespassing," I shot back. "You have no right to be back here without my permission." The HOA bylaws grant board members access to all properties for inspection purposes. No, they don't. They grant access for specific scheduled inspections with advance notice, not whenever you feel like wandering around taking pictures. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. Brenda finally turned to look at me, and her expression was pure malice. You're making a very big mistake, Ethan. I tried to handle this reasonably. All I wanted was to borrow your propane tank for one event, but you had to be difficult. So now I'm going to show you what happens to people who cross me. Get out, I repeated. She walked past me slowly, deliberately brushing against my shoulder as she went. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of her leaving my backyard, making sure to get clear shots of her face and the timestamp. That evening, I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I'd found her through an online search and read dozens of glowing reviews from people she'd helped fight unreasonable HOA boards. "Mr. Dalton," she said after I'd explained the situation, "what you're describing is harassment and potentially several criminal violations, including trespassing. The good news is that you have documentation. The bad news is that fighting an HOA can be expensive and time-consuming." "I don't care about expensive right now," I said honestly. "I care about this woman thinking she can just take my property and invade my privacy whenever she wants." "Then here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter to both Brenda Patterson personally and the HOA board as an entity. It will outline the harassment, the false violation notices, the trespassing, and the attempted property seizure. It will demand that all fines be withdrawn and that Miss Patterson cease all contact with you except through official, documented HOA business conducted in accordance with your bylaws. And if she doesn't stop, then we file a restraining order and potentially a lawsuit for harassment. We might also contact the police about the trespassing, but let's start with the letter and see if that gets through to her." The cease and desist went out 3 days later via certified mail. I felt a small surge of hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the end of it. I should have known better. 2 days after Brenda signed for the certified letter, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted the word "thief" across my garage door in huge red letters. I stood in my driveway in my pajamas at 6 in the morning, staring at the vandalism in disbelief. My neighbors were starting to come out of their houses, getting ready for work, and I could see them looking at my garage with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. I called the police immediately. Officer Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with tired eyes who took one look at my garage and shook his head. "HOA dispute?" he asked. "How did you know?" "Because I've been called out to this neighborhood 6 times in the past year for similar things. Let me guess, Brenda Patterson. You know her." Officer Rodriguez pulled out his notepad. "Unfortunately, she's got quite a reputation. Tell me everything." I walked him through the whole saga, starting with the propane tank demand and ending with the spray paint. I showed him my phone full of documentation, the violation notices, and the photos of Brenda in my backyard. "You have security cameras?" he asked. "No, but I'm installing them today." "Smart. Look, I can't prove Brenda did this, but I can file a report for vandalism. I'd also recommend you file a formal complaint about the trespassing. With her history and your documentation, it might actually go somewhere." "What history?" Officer Rodriguez glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Let's just say you're not the first person she's targeted. 3 years ago, she got into it with a family down the street over their holiday decorations. It ended with her slashing their tires. We couldn't prove it, but everyone knew. The family moved away rather than fight it." My stomach dropped. She slashed their tires and got away with it. No camera footage, no witnesses willing to come forward. "Look, Mr. Dalton, I'm not supposed to say this, but be careful. People like Brenda Patterson are dangerous because they're convinced they're in the right. They escalate, and they don't stop until they get what they want or someone forces them to stop." I filed the police report and the trespassing complaint. Then I called a cleaning service to remove the graffiti, which cost me $300. Then I went online and ordered a comprehensive security camera system with cameras covering my front door, driveway, backyard, and side yards. I also called Patricia Chen and updated her on the situation. "This is assault on property," she said grimly. "Combined with the trespassing and harassment, we have grounds for a restraining order. I'll file the paperwork today. In the meantime, those cameras are a good idea. Make sure they're recording 24/7. The cameras arrived the next day, and I spent 6 hours installing them. I'm not particularly handy, but fear is an excellent motivator. By evening, I had a full security system up and running with cloud backup and motion detection alerts sent directly to my phone. That night, at 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my backyard camera. I pulled up the feed and felt my blood run cold. Brenda was in my backyard again, this time with bolt cutters, trying to cut the chain I'd used to secure my propane tank to a post beside my garage. I called 911 immediately. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone in my backyard trying to steal my property. I have them on camera." "Are they in your house?" "No, they're outside in my backyard." "Are you in immediate danger?" "I don't think so, but I want them arrested for trespassing and attempted theft." "Officers are on the way." "Stay inside and keep your doors locked." I watched the camera feed as Brenda struggled with the bolt cutters. The chain I'd used was industrial grade, and she clearly didn't have the strength or the right tool to cut through it. After a few minutes, she gave up and looked directly at the camera. She'd known it was there. She didn't care. Then she pulled out her phone and appeared to take pictures of my propane tank, my patio furniture, and my back door. Police arrived 8 minutes later. I met them at the front door and showed them the live camera feed. Officers Rodriguez and a female officer named Chen went around back while I stayed inside. I watched on my phone as the officers confronted Brenda in my backyard. Even without audio, I could see her gesturing wildly, pointing at the propane tank and clearly arguing with them. Officer Rodriguez kept pointing toward the street, apparently telling her to leave. The confrontation lasted about 10 minutes before the officers came to my front door. "We found her in your backyard with bolt cutters," Officer Rodriguez said. "She claims she was conducting an HOA inspection and that the propane tank is HOA property." "At 2 in the morning, with bolt cutters." "That's what I said. We've arrested her for trespassing and attempted theft. You'll need to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement and provide the camera footage." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you. Seriously, thank you. Mr. Dalton, I want you to understand that she'll likely post bail and be out within hours. The restraining order your lawyer is filing will help, but you need to be vigilant. This woman has clearly become obsessed with your property." After the officers left with Brenda in handcuffs, I sat on my couch and tried to process what had just happened. A grown woman, the president of my HOA, had just been arrested trying to steal my propane tank in the middle of the night. It was surreal. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept checking the camera feeds, half expecting Brenda to somehow return. The next morning, I went to the police station and provided my full statement along with all the camera footage. The desk sergeant who took my information looked exhausted. "You're the third complaint we've had about Brenda Patterson this year," he said. "Last month, she tried to have a neighbor's dog declared a nuisance and attempted to trap it in her garage. Before that, she reported a family for having unauthorized guests staying with them, which turned out to be the wife's elderly mother recovering from surgery. Why is she still HOA president?" I asked. "Because most people in the neighborhood are either afraid of her or they don't want to deal with the drama of opposing her. The ones who do oppose her usually end up moving away. You're the first person who's actually fought back legally. I left the police station feeling both validated and worried. If people were so afraid of Brenda that they moved rather than fight her, what did that mean for my future in this neighborhood? I got my answer faster than I expected. That afternoon, I found a notice on my door from the HOA stating that I was being fined $5,000 for causing a disturbance and bringing police into the neighborhood, which negatively impacts property values and community reputation. I actually laughed out loud. The audacity was almost impressive. I photographed the notice and immediately sent it to Patricia Chen. She called me back within 10 minutes. This is retaliation, and it's blatant. We're filing an emergency motion for a restraining order today, and I'm also going to recommend you file a formal complaint with the Nevada Real Estate Division. HOAs are regulated, and this behavior is way over the line. Can they actually fine me for calling the police? Absolutely not. That would be illegal retaliation. Any judge will throw this out. But it shows that Brenda and potentially the rest of the board are not operating in good faith. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 4 days later. In the meantime, I received 2 more violation notices, one claiming my house numbers were faded and needed repainting, and another saying that my water usage was excessive and I needed to reduce it by 20%. Neither claim was legitimate. The day before the hearing, I received a letter from the HOA board, signed by all 5 members including Brenda. It stated that they were initiating foreclosure proceedings against my property for unpaid fines totaling $8,300. I called Patricia immediately, my hands shaking as I held the letter. They can't actually foreclose, can they? In Nevada, HOAs technically have the power to foreclose for unpaid assessments and fines, but only after following very specific legal procedures. They need to provide proper notice, opportunity to cure, and they can't foreclose for retaliatory or illegitimate fines. This letter is meant to scare you. Don't let it work. But it did scare me. The idea that this insane woman and her board cronies could potentially take my house over a propane tank, and a vendetta was terrifying. The restraining order hearing was held in a small courtroom in downtown Henderson. I wore my best suit and brought 3 binders full of documentation. Patricia Chen looked professional and confident in a navy blue suit. Brenda showed up wearing all white like she was going to a garden party and brought her own lawyer, a nervous-looking young man who couldn't have been more than 2 years out of law school. Judge Martha Hendricks was a stern-looking black woman in her 60s who peered at both parties over her reading glasses. This is a petition for a restraining order filed by Ethan Dalton against Brenda Patterson. Miss Chen, present your case. Patricia stood and launched into a clear, concise summary of everything that had happened. She presented the initial confrontation, the harassment through violation notices, the trespassing, the vandalism, the attempted theft, and the retaliatory fines. She had printed copies of every violation notice, every email, every photo, and the police reports. Judge Hendricks reviewed the materials in silence for several minutes. Then she looked at Brenda's lawyer. "Does your client dispute any of these facts?" The young lawyer stood uncertainly. "Your Honor, Miss Patterson was acting in her capacity as HOA president. The bylaws give her authority to inspect properties and enforce community standards. At 2 in the morning with bolt cutters, she disputes the time and the intent. She says she was simply trying to document HOA property that Mr. Dalton was refusing to surrender." Judge Hendricks looked at Brenda directly. "Miss Patterson, Did you enter Mr. Dalton's property without permission on the night of September 15th? Brenda stood up without being invited to do so. Your Honor, I was conducting official HOA business. That propane tank is community property, and Mr. Dalton has been uncooperative and hostile from the beginning. Sit down, Miss Patterson. I didn't ask you to stand. Now, did you or did you not enter his property without permission? Brenda sat, her face flushing red. I had HOA authority. That's not what I asked. Did you have his permission? I don't need his permission. I'm the HOA president. Judge Hendricks made a note. Miss Chen, I'm granting a temporary restraining order. Miss Patterson is to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Dalton's property, except for official HOA business conducted during reasonable hours with advance written notice, and preferably, witnesses present. She is not to contact Mr. Dalton directly in any form. All HOA communications must go through the board secretary. Brenda's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, that will make it impossible for Miss Patterson to perform her duties as HOA president. Then perhaps she should consider whether she's fit to continue in that role, Judge Hendricks said coolly. This court will not tolerate what appears to be systematic harassment over a property dispute. The restraining order is effective immediately. We'll have a full hearing in 30 days to determine if it should be made permanent. Mr. Dalton, continue documenting everything. Miss Patterson, I suggest you read up on the legal boundaries of HOA authority because you seem to have significantly misunderstood them. We left the courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. That went better than expected, Patricia said. Judge Hendricks doesn't mess around with harassment cases, but this isn't over. The restraining order will help, but we still need to deal with the HOA itself and those fraudulent fines. What's next? We file a complaint with the Nevada Real Estate Division and the Attorney General's office. What Brenda and the board are doing likely violates several state laws regarding HOA governance. We also need to start thinking about your long-term strategy. Do you want to stay in this neighborhood? I thought about it. 3 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. I'd loved the house, the location, the quiet streets, but now every time I pulled into my driveway, I felt anxious and stressed. I want to stay, I said finally. I shouldn't have to leave my home because one person is abusing her power. Patricia nodded approvingly. Then we fight. I'll start drafting the complaints today. The restraining order had an immediate effect. The violation notices stopped. The threatening letters stopped. For 3 blissful weeks, I heard nothing from the HOA, but I should have known it was too quiet. The bombshell came via email from someone named Carol Jensen, who identified herself as the HOA board secretary. The email was professionally written and polite, which immediately made me suspicious. Dear Mr. Dalton, it read. The HOA board has completed a review of recent events and has determined that Miss Patterson overstepped her authority in several instances. The board has voted to dismiss all outstanding fines against your property. However, the board maintains that your propane tank does fall under community equipment guidelines and respectfully requests that you make it available for the community barbecue scheduled for October 15th. As compensation, the HOA will cover the cost of propane refills for 6 months. Please respond at your earliest convenience. I forwarded the email to Patricia immediately with a single question. Is this real or a trap? She called me an hour later. It's both. The board is trying to cover themselves legally by backing off the harassment while still getting what Brenda originally wanted. My guess is they know they are exposed and they're trying to find a middle ground. What should I do? That's entirely up to you. Legally, you have no obligation to provide your personal property for HOA use. But if you refuse, they might try to frame you as the unreasonable one, especially now that they've dropped the fines. I thought about it for a long time. The petty part of me wanted to refuse just on principle. But the practical part of me was tired of fighting. What if I offer to let them use it for this one event under very specific conditions? I suggested. Like, I'm present the entire time, they provide all the propane, and they put in writing that this doesn't establish any precedent for future use. That could work. It shows good faith on your part while protecting your rights. I'll draft a response. The HOA agreed to my conditions, and the agreement was signed by all 5 board members. The community barbecue was scheduled for October 15th, which was 2 weeks away. In the meantime, I filed formal complaints with both the Nevada Real Estate Division and the Attorney General's office, detailing Brenda's conduct and the board's complicity through the retaliatory fines and attempted foreclosure threat. Patricia assured me that these investigations could take months, but they would put pressure on the board to operate properly. I also started attending HOA board meetings. I'd never gone to one before, assuming they were boring administrative affairs. I was wrong. The first meeting I attended was held in the community center, a bland room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting. About 20 homeowners were there, which apparently was a huge turnout according to the whispers I heard. Brenda sat at a table at the front with the 4 other board members. When I walked in, her eyes locked onto me with pure hatred, but she said nothing. The meeting covered standard topics like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. But then they got to new business, and a man I recognized from 3 houses down raised his hand. "I want to talk about the incident with Ethan Dalton and the propane tank situation," he said. Brenda's face went pale. "That matter has been resolved." "Has it?" "Because I heard Brenda was arrested for trespassing and theft. I heard there's a restraining order. And I heard she tried to fine Ethan thousands of dollars for defending his property. I think the community deserves an explanation." Other people started murmuring in agreement. Brenda looked like she wanted to bolt from the room. Another board member, a gray-haired man named Tom, cleared his throat. "The board has addressed the situation internally. Miss Patterson used poor judgment in her approach, but her intent was to benefit the community. Her intent was to steal someone's property because she didn't want to spend HOA money on propane." Someone else called out. The meeting devolved into chaos with multiple people shouting questions and accusations at the board. Brenda sat frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. Finally, Carol Jensen, the board secretary, stood up. "I think it's clear that the community has lost confidence in the current board's handling of this situation. I motion that we hold an emergency election for all board positions within 60 days. The room went silent. Tom looked at Carol in shock. "Carol, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. This has gone too far. We're facing complaints with the state. We have homeowners afraid to even talk to the board. We need a fresh start." The motion was seconded by multiple homeowners. According to the bylaws, if 20% of homeowners signed a petition, an emergency election could be called. By the end of the meeting, more than 30 homeowners had signed. Brenda didn't say a single word. She packed up her leather planner and walked out while people were still milling around talking. The emergency election was scheduled for November 20th. In the weeks leading up to it, the neighborhood was electric with gossip and drama. People started campaigning for board positions, holding coffee meetups and sending out flyers. It turned out that a lot of people had horror stories about Brenda, but had been too afraid to speak up. I met Martha Collins, who lived 4 streets over. She told me that Brenda had tried to force her to remove a vegetable garden from her backyard, claiming it was unsightly, even though the bylaws explicitly allowed gardens. When Martha refused, she received 15 violation notices in 1 month for increasingly absurd infractions. I met David and Jennifer Park, who'd been fined for parking their work van in their driveway overnight, even though David was a plumber and needed the van for emergency calls. When they protested, Brenda had their van towed at 3 in the morning. The stories went on and on. Brenda had been systematically bullying and harassing homeowners for years, and everyone had just accepted it because fighting her seemed impossible. The community barbecue happened on October 15th as scheduled. I brought my propane tank to the community center, supervised while they connected it to their grills, and stayed for the entire event. Dozens of people came up to me to thank me for standing up to Brenda and to apologize for not supporting me earlier. "We should have said something," Martha Collins told me, her eyes sad. "We should have stood up to her years ago. But it's easier to keep your head down and hope she doesn't target you next." "I get it," I said, "but we're fixing it now." Brenda showed up to the barbecue for exactly 10 minutes, long enough to make an appearance and take a few photos. She stayed on the opposite side of the community center from me, which was fine by both of us. The November 20th election had a record turnout. 78% of the homeowners voted. Brenda lost her position as president by a landslide. In fact, she wasn't elected to any position. The new board was composed of 5 reasonable people who actually seemed interested in serving the community rather than wielding power. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the election, I got a call from Detective Sarah Morrison from the Henderson Police Department. "Mr. Dalton, I need to ask you some questions about Brenda Patterson." My heart sank. "What did she do now? We've received multiple complaints from homeowners in your neighborhood alleging harassment, vandalism, and theft spanning the past 3 years. We're conducting a formal investigation. I understand you had a significant incident with her." I spent 2 hours on the phone with Detective Morrison, walking through everything that had happened. She took detailed notes and asked for copies of all my documentation. "Mr. Dalton, I want you to know that we're taking this seriously. If even half of what we're hearing is true, Miss Patterson has committed multiple criminal offenses. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case." The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Brenda apparently tried to sell her house and move, but word had spread through the real estate community about the investigation, and her sale kept falling through. The neighborhood was quieter than it had been in years, according to longtime residents. On January 8th, 2 days before the full restraining order hearing was scheduled, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with 8 counts of criminal mischief, 3 counts of theft, 6 counts of trespassing, and 2 counts of harassment. The evidence included not just my documentation, but security footage from 7 other homeowners, police reports going back 3 years, and financial records showing that Brenda had embezzled nearly $15,000 from the HOA budget for personal use. That last part shocked everyone. It turned out that while Brenda had been obsessed with my propane tank and claiming the HOA couldn't afford to buy their own, she'd been stealing from the HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including her car payment, spa visits, and shopping sprees. The new HOA board held an emergency meeting to address the embezzlement. They hired a forensic accountant who discovered that the theft went back 5 years and totaled closer to $40,000. The board filed a civil suit to recover the funds. Brenda's trial was scheduled for April. I was subpoenaed to testify, along with 8 other homeowners. Patricia Chen helped me prepare my testimony, though she assured me it was straightforward since I had overwhelming documentation. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented a devastating case showing a pattern of abuse of power, harassment, theft, and embezzlement. Brenda's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd been acting in what she believed was the community's best interest, and that the financial irregularities were accounting errors. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to each individual homeowner she'd harmed, including $2,000 to me for the cost of graffiti removal, security cameras, and legal fees, though my actual legal fees were much higher. The judge's words during sentencing stuck with me. "Miss Patterson, you were given a position of trust within your community, and you abused that trust systematically and deliberately. You used your authority not to serve your neighbors but to intimidate and control them. You stole from the very organization you claimed to represent. Your actions have caused lasting harm to dozens of people who simply wanted to live peacefully in their homes. This court hopes that your time in custody will give you an opportunity to reflect on the damage you've caused." Brenda showed no emotion during the sentencing. She was led away in handcuffs while her husband, who I'd seen at the trial but who'd never been involved in any of the HOA drama, sat in the gallery with his head in his hands. After the trial, several neighbors and I went out to dinner to decompress. Martha Collins raised her glass of wine. To Ethan, for having the courage to fight back when the rest of us were too scared. To all of us, I corrected. None of this would have worked if people hadn't finally come forward with their own stories. David Park nodded. "You know what's crazy? I drive past my house now, and I don't feel that little knot of anxiety anymore wondering what violation notice I'm going to find. I didn't even realize how much stress I was carrying until it was gone." "That's what people like Brenda count on," Patricia Chen said. She joined us for the dinner, having become something of a friend through the whole ordeal. "They make you so anxious and afraid that you'd rather just comply than fight, even when you know you're in the right. Breaking that cycle takes someone willing to stand up and say no." The new HOA board was functional and reasonable. They revised the bylaws to include clearer language about board authority, created an independent review process for violation notices, and implemented financial oversight to prevent future embezzlement. They also formally apologized to me and the other homeowners Brenda had targeted. My propane tank remained exactly where it had always been, chained to the post beside my garage. The HOA bought their own propane tanks for community events, which is what they should have done in the first place. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. I finished the home office renovation I'd been planning when the whole saga started. I made friends with several neighbors who'd been through their own battles with Brenda. The neighborhood started to feel like an actual community rather than a dictatorship, but there were lasting effects. I never quite lost the habit of checking my security cameras multiple times a day. I still felt a small spike of anxiety whenever I saw an envelope from the HOA in my mailbox, even though it was always just routine communications now. And I became much more aware of HOA rules and politics, attending every board meeting and staying informed about decisions that could affect my property rights. 6 months after Brenda's sentencing, I was working in my backyard, grilling steaks on my smoker that was powered by my propane tank when my doorbell rang. It was a young couple, probably in their late 20s, standing on my porch with a real estate agent. "Hi," the woman said nervously. "I'm sorry to bother you. We're thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood, and our agent said you went through something intense with the HOA. Would you mind telling us about it?" I invited them to sit on my porch and spent an hour telling them the whole story. They listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting to ask questions. "So would you recommend living here?" the man asked when I finished. I thought about it carefully. "Yeah, I would, but not because the neighborhood is perfect or because HOAs are great. I'd recommend it because the community came together and fixed a problem. We have a good board now, clear rules, and people who actually care about making this a nice place to live. Plus, you'll know going in that if something isn't right, you have the power to change it. You just have to be willing to stand up." They thanked me and left. A month later, I saw them moving into a house 2 streets over. The woman waved when she saw me on my evening walk, and I waved back. That's when I realized that the whole nightmare with Brenda had actually created something positive. The neighborhood was better now. People talked to each other. We looked out for one another. The HOA actually served its intended purpose of maintaining property values and community standards without being tyrannical about it. And I'd learned that I was stronger than I thought. When Brenda had first confronted me about the propane tank, I'd been shocked and overwhelmed. The idea of fighting an extended legal battle against my own HOA had seemed impossible. But I'd done it. I'd stood my ground, documented everything, gotten help from professionals, and refused to be bullied into giving up my rights. The propane tank itself, the object that had started this whole mess, had become something of a legend in the neighborhood. Kids would bike past my house and point at it. "That's the tank that got the HOA lady arrested," I heard one kid tell his friend. It was absurd, but it was also kind of perfect. On the 1-year anniversary of Brenda's arrest, the HOA threw a community barbecue. It was twice as big as the previous year's event, with games for kids, a live band, and enough food for everyone. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Gloria Matthews, gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and their commitment to making Sunset Ridge a true community. Then she did something unexpected. She called me up to the front. "Dalton showed us all that one person standing up for what's right can make a difference," Gloria said. "He could have just given in or moved away like others had done before. Instead, he fought for his rights and in doing so, freed all of us from a toxic situation. The board wants to present him with this plaque in recognition of his courage and service to our community." I was genuinely shocked. The plaque read, "Presented to Dalton for outstanding service and courage in defense of homeowner rights. Your stand made our community stronger." People applauded, and several folks came up to shake my hand afterward. It was embarrassing and touching at the same time. That evening, I sat on my back patio with a beer, looking at my propane tank and thinking about everything that had happened. A year ago, I'd been a quiet guy who worked from home and just wanted to grill in peace. I'd never imagined I'd end up in a legal battle that would result in criminal prosecutions and HOA reform. But I'd also never imagined I'd find a real community or make the kind of friends who'd shown up to support me through the trial. I'd never thought I'd become someone that new homeowners sought out for advice or that kids would tell stories about. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my friend who'd given me advice at the beginning of all this. "Saw the local news story about your HOA plaque. You're famous now. How does it feel to be a neighborhood hero?" I smiled and typed back, "Weird, but good weird. Thanks for pushing me to document everything. You probably saved my sanity." "You saved your own sanity by not backing down," he replied. "Most people would have just given her the tank to make the problem go away." He was right. The easy thing would have been to just let Brenda take the propane tank. It was just a tank after all. I could have bought another one or just let the HOA use mine without protest. But it was never really about the propane tank. It was about the principle that someone in a position of minor authority thought they could bully and intimidate people into surrendering their property and their rights. It was about the fact that Brenda had been getting away with that behavior for years because no one had been willing to push back hard enough. And it was about the realization that our homes are supposed to be our sanctuaries, the places where we feel safe and in control, and that letting someone violate that sanctuary, even in small ways, chips away at something fundamental. I defended my propane tank, yes. But more importantly, I defended my right to live peacefully in my own home without fear of harassment or retaliation. And in doing so, I'd helped dozens of other people reclaim that same right. The Nevada Real Estate Division ended up using Brenda's case as an example in their HOA board training materials. Patricia Chen told me they'd cited it as a textbook example of HOA abuse and the importance of proper oversight and accountability. The civil suit resulted in Brenda's house being sold to cover her restitution payments. Her husband divorced her while she was in prison. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to Arizona after her release and was living with her sister. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I just felt relieved that she was gone and couldn't hurt anyone else. The neighborhood thrived under the new board. Property values actually increased because word spread that Sunset Ridge had cleaned house and was now a model HOA community. People wanted to live in a place where homeowners had power and the board was accountable. 2 years after the whole saga ended, I was at another community barbecue, this one celebrating the neighborhood's 25th anniversary. The event was huge, with catering and a bounce house and a local news crew doing a feel-good story about strong communities. I was manning one of the grills, powered by my infamous propane tank, when a reporter approached me. "You're Ethan Dalton, right?" "The guy who stood up to the corrupt HOA president," I nodded cautiously. "That's me. Would you be willing to do a quick interview? We're doing a piece on how communities can overcome internal conflicts and become stronger." I agreed, and the reporter asked me basic questions about what happened and what I'd learned. When she asked if I'd do anything differently, I thought about it carefully. "I wish I'd known earlier that I wasn't alone," I said finally. I spent the first few weeks thinking I was the only person having problems with Brenda, that maybe I was being unreasonable. If I'd known that other people were going through the same thing, I might have acted sooner. So I guess my advice to anyone in a similar situation is to talk to your neighbors. Find out if you're dealing with an isolated incident or a pattern. There's strength in numbers. The interview aired on the local news that evening, and my phone blew up with messages from friends and family who'd seen it. My mom called from Oregon, where she'd retired, proud and worried in equal measure. "I can't believe you went through all that and barely mentioned it when we talked," she said. "I didn't want you to worry." "Well, I'm proud of you. Your father would be too. My dad had passed away 5 years earlier, and I still missed him. He'd been a carpenter, a straightforward guy who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard. I think he would have been proud that I'd stood my ground. As I settled into my 3rd year in the house, the whole Brenda situation started to feel like ancient history. New families moved in who'd never known her reign of terror. The neighborhood kids who'd heard stories about the infamous propane tank were now teenagers who didn't care about HOA drama. Life moved on as it does. But I kept that plaque on my wall in my home office, right where I could see it when I was working. Not because I was particularly proud or wanted to show off, but because it reminded me that ordinary people can fight back against injustice, even petty suburban injustice. It reminded me that documentation and persistence and refusing to be intimidated can defeat someone who seems untouchable. It reminded me that communities are stronger when people look out for each other rather than staying silent out of fear. And yeah, it reminded me that sometimes the most ridiculous conflicts, the ones that start with something as mundane as a propane tank, can end up changing everything for the better. My propane tank is still chained to that post beside my garage. It's still fully functional, still powers my smoker and grill, and still belongs entirely to me. But now it's also a symbol of something bigger. A reminder that when someone demands what's yours and threatens you for saying no, you have every right to stand your ground and fight back. Because it was never about the propane tank. It was about refusing to let a bully win. And in the end, the bully lost, the community won, and I got to keep grilling steaks in my backyard in peace. That's a pretty good ending to what started as a nightmare. These days, when new homeowners move into Sunset Ridge, the welcome packet includes information about homeowner rights, the complaint process, and contact information for the board members. It includes language about how the HOA exists to serve the homeowners, not the other way around. And it includes a brief history of the 2025 reforms, without naming names, that explains why oversight and accountability matter. I've been asked to serve on the HOA board twice now. I've declined both times. I have no interest in being part of HOA governance. I'm happy to stay informed and show up to meetings when important issues arise, but I've done my time in the trenches. Let someone else handle the day-to-day administrative work. What I did agree to do was serve on a neighborhood watch committee and help organize social events. It turns out that when you're not living in fear of your HOA, you actually enjoy spending time with your neighbors. Last summer, Martha Collins and I organized a neighborhood yard sale that raised $3,000 for the local elementary school. David Park started a monthly poker night for the guys in the neighborhood. Gloria Matthews launched a book club that meets at the community center. These are the things that make a neighborhood feel like home. Not strict enforcement of arbitrary rules, not power trips by petty tyrants, but actual community connection and mutual support. And my propane tank powers the grill at all our events, freely offered and gratefully used, because that's what neighbors do. They share resources and help each other out, not because some rule says they have to, but because it's the right thing to do. Brenda Patterson demanded my propane tank and threatened me when I refused. In doing so, she accidentally created something she never intended, a united, empowered community that refuses to be bullied. I'd call that poetic justice, with a side of perfectly grilled burgers.